Hi everyone, and welcome to the ShipFC workshop. My name is Tore Boge, and I'm the project coordinator. In ShipFC, we will install the world's first high-power ammonia fuel cell on board Viking Energy. The goal is to demonstrate the feasibility of ammonia fuel cells for ocean-going vessels. The data that we gather from the pilot will be used in an analysis for further scale-up towards ocean-going vessels, such as container vessels and bulk carriers. This will effectively open up a completely new alternative for zero-emission shipping and create a foundation for further scale-up of ammonia-powered fuel cells. Powerful stakeholders worldwide are now showing an increased interest in ammonia as a maritime fuel for the future. To meet IMO's reduction targets for 2050, the need for green ammonia and fuel cell technology is highly relevant, and it's considered one of the most promising technologies and solutions for ships with a high power demand. Green ammonia is produced from renewable energy sources, and there is no carbon dioxide when it's combusted. Since ammonia is already traded on a global scale, it is possible to build on existing knowledge and existing infrastructure when we are developing green ammonia fuel. Ammonia is often considered as the best option as replacement for fossil fuels due to its high energy density and its possibility to also be an option for large ocean-going vessels. But there are still some challenges that needs to be overcome, both technical and safety-related challenges. In the design of engine and fuel cells for the future, the manufacturers and the engineers need to focus on the technical hurdles and overcome these challenges. In parallel, port operators and fuel suppliers need to follow up with the infrastructure for providing the green ammonia to the ship users. In today's workshop, we will discuss both the opportunities and also the challenges related to green ammonia fuel. And we have a lot of good stakeholders involved with us here today who are all at the forefront of this innovative path. Now, let's have a look at today's agenda. We will start with an institutional opening before we head over to our technical session. And then in the end, we will have a panel discussion. To guide you through the event today, there are a few guidelines. There will be a Q&A at the end of each technical presentation and also during the panel discussion. You can type your questions in the Q&A tab that you have available on your screen. The workshop will be recorded and the presentations will be made available after the workshop. Now let's introduce our first speaker of the day. Professor Kurt Bodevik has been coordinator for the 10T motorways since 2018. Prior to this, he was the coordinator for the 10T Baltic Adriatic for 4 years. And he has worked in the German public and private sector within the transport domain and has held several central positions, both as federal minister and state secretary for transport, infrastructure, and housing. Mr. Bodevik has also been a member of the German Bundestag for over a decade. We are looking forward to hear from you, Mr. Bodevik, and whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. Distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, hello to all participants. It's my great pleasure to participate on the ShipFC conference today. Before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to open the conference. My name is Kurt Bodevik, as you have heard, and as you already know, I'm the European coordinator for the motorways of the sea. The topic today's conference is highly relevant and it will get straight to the point. we have several major tasks in front of us. Climate change and environmental degradation are existing threat to Europe and the world. The transport sector's greenhouse gas emissions have increased over time and represent now as much as a quarter of the EU's total emissions. The European Green Deal calls for 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from transport. It's a huge sum. The European Green Deal calls for 90% reduction, as I've said, but the sustainable and smart mobility strategy calls for an increase of 25% of the short-haul shipping by 2030 and a 50% increase by 2050. That is a huge challenge. And if you see that we have a reduction plan until 2050 of 90% of the green gas, so you see there's a lot to do for that. The maritime sector is at the meantime a crucial sector. Almost 8% of all goods in the EU are transported by sea. The sector is also considered central to ensure efficient trade within the EU, as well as connecting the mainland to Europe's peripheral regions and islands. To reach this ambitious objective in the Green Deal, as well as in the sustainable and smart mobility strategy, we need to reinforce our efforts within the maritime pillar of the Trans-European Transport Network policy. It is clear that significant investments are needed. Investments in fleet renewals, alternative fuels infrastructure, and last mile connection to the rest of the TEN-T. Within the ongoing TEN-T revision, we have now an opportunity to reinforce the maritime dimension of the European transport policy and to enable a continued development. So our resources are limited, but we must continue to be ambitious to contribute to the decarbonization of the transport sector. In this context, it is worth to reflect on how ongoing pandemic is affecting the economy and the maritime sector specifically, and where the potential to achieve an economic recovery after the pandemic may lie. Global trade has contracted more now than during the financial crisis in 2008-2009. Huge investments are needed in all transport sectors to address the threat of climate change, as well as the recovery of the European economy following the COVID-19 pandemic. Having said that, the maritime sector can be a part of the solution. The model shift from road to maritime transport must increase. We have some projects which is running to take a lot of transport from road now to shorter shipping. The cost effectiveness, lower carbon emissions, and reduced road congestion are just few examples of advantages with maritime transport could be a solution. Alternative fuels will be major triggers of a greater model shift from road to maritime transport. There is not a single solution to the decarbonization challenge. There will not be a single alternative fuel for the future of the maritime sector. We must, however, remain ambitious and diligent in achieving the climate objective while having a technical neutral approach to allow all appropriate decarbonization measures. This requires that fuel of the future are sustainable, not only when they are being used in vessels, but also when they are being produced and refined in other industrial processes. And it's also a question how we get the energy for this. Ammonia and hydrogen could, in other words, be a part of the decarbonization solutions. More research and investment will, however, be needed to ensure that fuels of the future can be produced sustainably and on industrial scale. And the market can absorb the new fuel solutions is another task. New legal proposals on this topic from the European Commission, as well as demands from the citizens, are opening up new horizons for the use of alternative fuels in Europe. I strongly advocate for investments in decarbonization and promising alternative fuels, onshore power supply, innovation in propulsion system, as well as the use of eco-incentives. All stakeholders must cooperate to accelerate the model shift. The co-funding instruments of the European Union provides opportunities, but commitment is also needed from member states and the industry stakeholders. Grants from the European Union alone will not be enough to tackle the challenges of the maritime sector. There is, however, a great potential in the sector to make a tangible impact on the environment. I support the positive development of the European maritime sector and finding ways to promote more sustainable and better interconnectivity between the European sea basins. That brings me to the end of my short inputs. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much again for inviting me to this very important workshop. And I wish all of us, and I wish the climate change forcing that we get very good success on this today's workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bodevik, for setting the stage for our webinar and our workshop today, and very important topics, and with a holistic perspective. I think it's setting the stage in an excellent way for us, that we are one of several alternatives with the ammonia and hydrogen society that we are trying to build ahead of us. So thank you again for taking time to join us today. Our next speaker is Mr. Bart Biebjuk, who is the Executive Director for the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. The FCH-JU, which it is also called, is a public-private partnership aiming at facilitating the deployment of fuel cells and hydrogen technologies in Europe. Prior to joining the FCH-JU, he was at the fuel cell department of Toyota Motor Europe, where he held the position as technical manager. In addition to his industrial and technical experience, Bart has been politically active in his local town since 2006. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Biebjuk. Whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boge, for the kind introduction, and also thanks for having me here today at the ShipFC workshop. Also, I would like to thank also Mr. Bodevik for his very interesting speech, and he touched also upon very important points, especially the one where member states have to work together also with the European Commission, but even those two cannot do it alone, and we need also investments of the private partners. And I think it's a very, very relevant and important message from Mr. Bodevik. Okay, coming back a little bit on the topic of today, decarbonization of shipping, extremely important. We have to do it, and I think that also recently in July, when the European Commission has issued their Fit for 55 package, the proposal at least, now it's being negotiated between the member states and the parliament, but it was very clear that we have to step up, and that's also why the European Commission has proposed to put the shipping emissions also in the ETS scheme and the emission trading scheme. And I think that will, of course, also push forward the decarbonization of shipping. Additionally, also this workshop comes very timely, because today we are preparing for the COP26, and I'm not sure if you heard about it, but I heard that the Prime Minister of the UK, Mr. Johnson, is aiming to make a proposal and try to make a commitment for the shipping sector that they have to go to zero emissions by 2050. Whether he will be able to get such an agreement at the COP26, I don't know. We will see, of course. But it shows clearly that maybe he's not really satisfied with the 50% commitment from the IMO on the reduction of the CO2. So I can understand that probably in the negotiations, shipping will be part of the discussion. Whether it will go to 0%, I don't know, but for sure they will discuss a more severe target for the shipping sector. That means that we need to do the decarbonization, and we need to do it faster. And I believe that ammonia, and we will discuss this today, is definitely one of a very important factor in this, in this decarbonization pathway. Talking about first a bit about the FCH-JU, for those who doesn't know us, because I heard that there are more than 300 people here joining today, and I think this is a great success. It shows also the interest of the topic. And for those who does not know yet, the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking, well, we are a public-private partnership. We are working together with 3 partners. The first partner is Hydrogen Europe, the industry. They are now more than 300 members, big industries, small industries. Then another partner we have is Hydrogen Europe Research. That's around 100 research institutes, universities. And then we working also, there's a third partner, the public partner is the European Commission, which basically gives us the money which that we are using to fund projects. So far we have funded 287 projects since 2008 for a little bit over 1 billion euro, and also the private members have put in 1 billion euro. So far, you can say 2 billion euro has been put it in this in the field of hydrogen and fuel cells, which includes also, of course, the shipping. Now, some of you might have heard that the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking will stop to exist at the end of the year, and normally by January next year we will start with a new partnership. The name will be Clean Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. And as also Mr. Bodewijk already mentioned, we need to keep investing in research and innovation, and that's why also the European Commission has decided to continue this very successful way of partnering together with the industry and this successful way of working together. And so the next partnership will will shift a little bit the focus, not so much, but a little bit. So we, of course, will continue to work on the hydrogen production. Hydrogen production, of course, electrolyzers will be a big part of it, but also we will look to low TRL production methods. Secondly, we will have the distribution and infrastructure, and that's new to us. That will be new to the program, because we will have to look at that on, for example, repurposing of the current natural gas pipelines to transport hydrogen, for example. But also we have to look into carriers, and one of the carriers is, of course, ammonia, but also we will have to look to liquid hydrogen or methanol. So we will do research on various carriers. For example, in ammonia, we need to look at the dehydrogenation point of view. And then finally, we will also work on the end use in transportation. For example, we will look mainly on the heavy duty part. Maritime is part of the heavy duty. What is also interesting that in the next program, which is called Horizon Europe, that also other partnerships now have to work on hydrogen. It's a mandate, and we will have 7 partnerships depending on the end use application that has to work or launch calls on hydrogen. And in your case, zero emission waterborne will be a very important player, and we are working very close together with them in order to align our calls, eventually do joint calls or so on. We are still discussing that, but we want to work together and in that sense, basically try to leverage the money going into the decarbonization for the maritime. Finally, on the projects itself. So as I said, we have supported already many projects, and then we look to the projects of maritime, for example. We started back in 2013, where we had a first project, very small scale, 50 kilowatt project on a yacht. But then gradually over time, and I have to say since 2017, we really tried to push the envelope. We gradually built up. We had then 100 kilowatt scale of fuel cells. Then we went to the megawatt, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts. Finally, our latest project on liquid hydrogen has a 3 megawatt fuel cell. So really, we push the level, which is very important. So ShipFC is one of these projects that we are funding, and it's a very important project for us. Why? Because it's a kind of a pioneering project in the world. I know that the whole world is really looking to this project, to your project on FC Ship. And why is that? Because it's quite unique. I mean, it uses ammonia in an SOFC, solid oxide fuel cell, which is, I think, it's the only project worldwide who is doing that. We know that with an SOFC, probably we will reach very high efficiencies and no noise. So there's a lot of benefit of doing that. Of course, the challenge here is still, as I mentioned, or it was also mentioned by the previous speakers, is about safety. We need to make sure that using ammonia in a ship is, of course, safe. And I do know that there are still some concerns among operators. And I believe this workshop will also help to educate operators of ships that with ammonia, it can be done in a safe way. But I believe that the consortium has really a very, very important role in that respect. Of course, there's also this discussion whether we should use a fuel cell with ammonia or we can do direct combustion with ammonia. This kind of discussions as well happen. Probably we will see both. But I believe that fuel cells have definitely a very big advantage over combustion engines on ammonia, which, by the way, will also take still a couple of years to develop. Then the discussion on the carriers. Well, you know, there are many carriers. We talk about liquid hydrogen, ammonia, methanol. I mean, today, I would say, well, we see a little bit. I mean, there's some trend is going already. It's not yet decided because we are still waiting on what the regulation, the policies will be. I know that on the European Commission, they are really working very, very hard to define all the right policies and the definitions for each of the policies that are coming. And we hope that in the coming months, we get more clarity on that. But for example, what we see happening a little bit when we talk on pure hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, probably that will be more used in the inland waterways, maybe port operations, maybe ferries, this kind of small things. When we move really to deep sea vessels, there probably we will see ammonia. I think pure hydrogen will have a very difficult, will have a lot of difficulty to make it there because of the density. But ammonia will definitely play a very important role there. Potentially also methanol. So today, whether it's methanol or ammonia, it's pretty unclear. I feel that there's a very clear tendency among policymakers that ammonia will be preferable because it has no CO2 emissions. Maybe in the beginning, we might still have methanol there because it's kind of carbon neutral. But again, as I said, it will be very important how the legislator will look at that, because the CO2 that you will use, for example, for methanol, I mean, how will you tax it? Will it be taxed or not be taxed? Or which CO2 is allowed? All these kind of things are today not clear. And so that's why I believe that ammonia at the moment has a quite, a good position in that sense. Another action that we are doing is working with ports. It was already mentioned as well. I mean, how do we do the bunkering of ammonia in the ports? How about the infrastructure? So we started two initiatives. One, the first initiative is the Global Ports Initiative. We are working together now with ports around the world. I think it's a little bit more than 40 ports now there in that initiative. It's an initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial, where basically we try to identify roadblocks. Mainly regulatory roadblocks, but also technical roadblocks, if any, and try to agree a bit among all the global ports on the bunkering capacities, or how do we do the production of hydrogen? Do we do it on site? How do we bring the hydrogen to the port's environment, etc. So we just started. We will have a first meeting with those ports, I think, by the end of September, and I'm looking really forward to start discussing with the ports, because if only European ports will do it, well, it cannot happen. So we really need to tackle that on a global scale. At the same time, we will start a European Ports Initiative. And I think we will probably kick off that next month in October, where basically we bring together the European ports to really make a decarbonization roadmap. I mean, we know the LNG roadmap that was made a couple of years ago. So now we want to make a hydrogen roadmap also for ports. Hydrogen can be used in its purest form, can be used in ammonia, methanol, etc., as the building blocks. So we need to make a very clear roadmap how we will decarbonize the ports. And I know that, for example, the big ports already, I mean, like Hamburg, but also Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Antwerp, they have shown already a huge interest and are willing to work with us on that. Finally, IMO rules. I mean, I have discussed already on the IMO, and that probably the targets might become more severe at the COP26. But also, I mean, the IMO was very slow in making rules for putting vessels on the sea using fuel cells, be it hydrogen or be it in ammonia. And I was very happy now that I think it was in the week of the 6th September that finally a first draft rules on how to put fuel cells on ships was approved. I think that's a very good step forward. Also, there is another working group at the IMO. They were talking about safety and the safety rules of using hydrogen and so on ships. So they are moving in the right direction, finally, I would say, after many years. But I think it's also important for all of us here, I mean, those who have good connections with the IMO, to keep pushing the IMO. I mean, we don't have 10 years time to make rules. I mean, LNG, it took 10 years to make the LNG rules. It's not acceptable. It's way too long. I mean, I have calls now from operators of vessels. They say, well, Bart, what should I do? What kind of ship should I put? I mean, they are waiting for more clarity, and we need to have the rules, because otherwise we will not have ships on the sea. And finally, on the future, and that's my final point, Mr. Boge, I see you there. So it's about the future. We are preparing the next call, so we will have a probably the next calls for proposals in January next year. We will keep maritime still there. I mean, for example, I hope you all saw the call from the Zero Emission Waterborne. It has a topic also on ammonia, on the storage of ammonia on a ship. So please have a look to that topic. And if you have a good idea, please make a proposal for that. And as I said, we will have calls next year. Probably we will do 2 calls, 2 times 150 million euro for calls. And might be there will be one big call on inland waterways. And with this, I would like to close and wish you all the best for this workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bibok. It's very inspirational to hear your speech, and also the increased focus on the regulatory side. The pressure needs to be kept up, as you say. And it will be very interesting as we move on today, where we have both an ammonia producer and also a port with us to look into some of the perspectives that you have now shared with us. So thank you very much for taking time to join us today, and good luck with the clean hydrogen joint undertaking and the work that you have ahead of you there. So thanks again for your support, and we'll meet again.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Now, our next session of the day is the technical session. And here you also have the possibility to pose questions by clicking the Q&A button that you have on your screen. And our first speaker of this session, Mr. Kjalve Svendsen, he's a researcher at CMR Prototech. He's been there since 2013. He's got a background within theoretical physics and engineering, energy physics, and he worked with fuel cell systems and hydrogen technologies for different applications, I believe also including space. He's also a member of the Norwegian Hydrogen Association since 2015. He's a board member there, and he's one of the work package leaders in our ShipFC project, where he's responsible for the fuel cell development. So, Mr. Svendsen, whenever you are ready, we're looking forward to hear from you today.
Thanks a lot, Tove, for the introduction. Thanks also to the previous speakers. That was very interesting, and for letting me be able to present at this webinar. So I will speak today about the ShipFC project in a bit more detail from the technical point of view, and especially focusing on how we see that high temperature fuel cells can be an enabler for sustainable shipping. As Tove said, I'm working at Prototech, and we are leading the work package related to fuel cell development and demonstration of the 2 megawatt solid oxide fuel cell system on board the Viking Energy vessel. So just as an introduction, we see that there are 4 main drivers for introducing the demand for zero emission shipping. We have on the consumer side, we have a demand for emission-free products and also willingness to pay additional for emission-free products with low carbon footprint. Of course, very important is increasing CO2 taxes and targets set by IMO and other regulatory incentives. We have major cost reductions of clean fuels projected towards 2030 and beyond. And my focus of this presentation will be the emerging clean fuel technologies that are starting to be developed, demonstrated, and commercialized. Just also, when we look at the different technologies, I think it's also worth mentioning that if you look into the close to 100,000 commercial vessels operating along all over the world, we can divide them in separate types of vessels. So I think there are 2 parameters that are very important. One is the duration of the voyage. How much energy do you need to store on board the vessel? And also how predictable is the bunkering? So for a local car ferry in Norway operating between 2 ports, I think it's easier to use, for instance, clean hydrogen and develop the infrastructure for that, while a deep sea vessel operating all over the world will have huge benefit of the fuel flexibility, because I think the major task that we need to overcome is to develop the value chain for the sustainable fuels towards or as soon as possible. And also worth mentioning is that the ones with long voyage duration and unpredictable bunkering time, that will need the fuel flexibility, the high efficiency. These parameters are determinant for the overall cost picture that represent approximately 90% of the overall fleet and also the carbon emissions and other emissions. So this is why we are focusing on this type of technology. Obviously, we have different types of technologies that are relevant. Batteries have a very important role, especially within energy optimization, peak shaving, load balancing for different types of vessels. We have the low temperature fuel cell systems, the PEM technology, that are obviously highly attractive when it comes to fast transients. It's compact, it's low weight, and you have declining costs due to other applications that we are starting to see. However, as we assess it, at least this technology is most relevant for pure hydrogen operation. So when we are looking into the different types of fuel, especially ammonia, but also methanol, LNG, LOHC, other types of relevant fuels for the future, I think the most relevant technologies are the multi-fuel internal combustion engine technology and the high temperature fuel cell systems that we are looking at. Both have their advantages. The engine types are developing to also be able to operate on ammonia. You have the experience, the heritage, the low capex, possibility to retrofit engines, while they also need development to take into account possible fuel slips, NOx production, and also fuel mixing due to the low flammability of ammonia. The high temperature fuel cells have their clear benefits on the fuel flexibility. You can operate on all these relevant different fuels with minor modifications on the systems. It has the potential of having a superior efficiency, reducing the fuel consumption, which is very important, and even more important when we go into the more sustainable fuels that have a lower energy density than existing fuels. When you have no fuel slips, we are looking into the NOx, N2O emissions to minimize this and get it close to zero. While on the other hand, it is technology that is quite early stage in development. You have slower transients and startup times, and at least a very high potential for capex reductions in years to come. So this also undermines the importance of the ShipFC project. At Prototech, so Prototech comes from a research institute for many years, focusing on technology development on different segments. While we, in June, we were acquired by one of the largest industry companies in Norway, Aker. And we are now focusing a lot of our efforts on commercializing this high temperature fuel cells for marine applications. And we have two large projects, official projects that we have. We have the ShipFC demonstration, and we have an ongoing work together with Odfjell for a deep sea vessel retrofit pilot, and working together with many large and interesting companies. We also have development projects ongoing where we are developing the systems and testing the systems and preparing for these installations. Now, the ShipFC project is, we have 14 partners, end users, resource institutes, and other partners involved. A very interesting project. We will, as Tor also mentioned, demonstrate a 2 megawatt ammonia fuel cell system on board Eidesvik's Viking Energy offshore supply vessel. We received 10 million euro funding from the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, while we have a total budget of 21.5 million euro. And with a target of at least 1 year trial period and 3,000 hour operation, but with an ambition to have it on board as long as practically possible. We are also looking at the bigger picture where we are looking into the scaling of the system. So also look into how high temperature fuel cells can be scaled to 20 megawatt applications for container ships and tankers and construction vessels and these things. And we have the relevant end users also part of the project and a specific work package related to this. This is also an important part of the project. We are now, the project started in 2020. We are now in the detailed design phase and preparing for the manufacturing of the solid oxide fuel cells in early 2023, and with an ambition to install the system end of 2023 and start operation in 2024. So this is what we are aiming for. Just as a summary, as I said, we are now commercializing this technology, and we've established a separate entity to do that, strongly backed by Aker, using the experience and heritage we have at Prototech for 30 years of fuel cell system development. Extremely motivated and believe that this type of technology can really make a difference for enabling sustainable shipping in the future. So please contact me if you have any further questions or if you're interested in joining this journey. So thank you all again for listening.
Thank you, Tjalve, for a very interesting presentation, and good luck to you as well with your further research. And we are following this closely in the ShipFC project, of course, and we're excited to start testing in some time ahead and see some results. So thank you very much for joining us today. Our next speaker is Mr. Øystein Leren, who is the Director of Industry and Market Leads in Yara Clean Ammonia. He's responsible for development of zero emission projects with special focus on energy and fuel applications. He spent more than 25 years in Norsk Hydro and in Yara, working in various positions between business development, innovation, and R&D. For the last 5 years, he's been focusing on decarbonization and projects for commercializing of zero emission ammonia. So Øystein, whenever you are ready, we are looking forward to hear from Yara and your perspectives on this interesting topic.
Thank you very much for that, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Can you now see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. You can put it in presentation mode.
Of course.
Perfect.
Very good. Thanks again. I'm going to spend just a few minutes explaining a little bit about the ammonia infrastructure. Some of you have heard about the leap going from ammonia to fuels before. So in addition to that, I'm going to give you a little presentation then of the plans that we have for the future. So let's start with the history. Yara is one of the largest fertilizer companies in the world. So going into the maritime sector is rather new. We do, however, run a business in maritime technology already. So we have a certain presence there already. The way into this is, of course, that as part of our fertilizer business, we're an integrated fertilizer company. We also produce our products, and we are one of the largest producers of ammonia today, with a capacity of around 8.5 million tons of ammonia. All of that is produced from natural gas, which is giving us emissions in the range of 12-13 million tons of CO2 every year. And some 5 years ago, we started following a significantly revised climate strategy. We started looking into how we could reduce and finally eliminate CO2 emissions from ammonia production. As part of that work, we soon bumped into new applications for zero emission ammonia, and realized that zero emission ammonia could serve as a dedicated product into the energy and fuel sector. And this is the reason also why we landed on ammonia, zero emission ammonia, as a shipping fuel. There was a coincidence, or not a coincidence, but there was a presentation of a couple of reports coming a couple of years ago, at the same time as IMO launched their new emissions, which was pointing at clean ammonia as a very promising fuel. And it was, of course, the volume and the size of the business here, which is also making this very important for us, and important enough for Yara to establish a separate business entity, which is Yara Clean Ammonia, to take that operations forward. We believe that our starting point is quite good, and this is a snapshot of where we are with infrastructure today. We are shipping in the range of 4 million tons of ammonia. There is an established infrastructure, an established value chain, from production to physical movement of the product at sea, and then a terminal infrastructure for receiving ammonia. It's a total, the total volume is about 20 million tons of ammonia. So in a future fuel perspective, that's not maybe a lot. So we see that there are some challenges, of course, going ahead, but the fundamentals of the infrastructure is there. And of course, we believe that this is a good starting point for Yara as well. And this is also why we have chosen to say that we would like to be in this business and in the entire value chain, from production of ammonia to shipping the product and to serving the end user. So how are we planning to take this forward then? And there has been many discussions around what the best approach would be, because which corridor, if you like, of transport, which will emerge as the first one, is the big question here. And looking into the crystal ball, there is no evident answers there, but it might be that there are some heavily trafficked international corridors that might arrive soon. And by soon, we're talking about 5 to 10 years. But we also see that the activities in Norway is quite high. There are a number of projects going on, and we have a presence here, which is unique. And we are running our largest production project in Norway with the Hegra project, which is making Norway a priority area for us. So that's where we plan to start, and it's also then planned to be the testing ground for technical solutions, because what we are looking at is ammonia bunkering solutions as onshore terminal and shore-to-ship bunkering. We're looking at barges and ship-to-ship bunkering, and we're looking into floating terminal operations. And all of that are options still open, and it's early days in the development of technical solutions here. The next thing is to build on our position then in around important bunkering hubs, and I'm mentioning here Singapore, Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Hamburg. All are close to a very important production sources for us. So what we plan to do is to link them with existing and new infrastructure. And I'll also mention there Houston and the Mississippi area, which is connected to Yara Freeport, where we also have a significant infrastructure in place. And then we are of course talking about the global extension and expansion, and all of that will happen at let's say according to a plan which is not there yet, because we don't see exactly where we need to make the investments before we know more about the development of the market, which is the big question here. And on top of this, of course, and in parallel, we continue our greenification projects of our assets so that we can actually provide to the market the zero carbon ammonia. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you very much, Øystein, for sharing Yara's thoughts, and very interesting. And we're happy to have you on board in the ShipFC project, where we have both then ammonia producer, and also, as you mentioned, you are already in the logistics value chain. So thank you very much. The questions that are coming in, we are taking care of those, and we will do our best to answer in and reply to you by email if there is no time at the end. We are running a bit late, so we'll just move on with the presentation first and then get back to the questions if time allows. But they will be answered by email if not online here today. Now, moving on in the program, we have one of the ship owners with us today, and we're lucky enough to have Mr. Sabas Martinez, who is the General Manager for the NYK Energy Transport in UK. And he's in charge of the green business development for NYK's projects and initiatives to decarbonize the marine shipping. So, Mr. Martinez, whenever you are ready to start your presentation, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ture. I will share now my screen. Okay, hopefully. Yes, hopefully you get the full screen now. Thank you very much to the organization for inviting NYK to present what is our view on the use of ammonia as marine fuel from a ship owner perspective. First of all, I will start by introducing rapidly NYK. NYK is a Japanese global shipping and logistics company. It's one of the world's largest, offering ocean, land, and air transport services. The company operates nowadays more than 800 vessels, and for example, has the largest pure car truck carrier fleet and one of the largest in bulk carrier and LNG carrier. We are also providing air freight services and inland logistics services with more than 600 logistics centers and terminal operations in 21 ports. NYK has a clear and strong commitment with decarbonization of the maritime sector. This has been proven over the last years with, for example, being pioneer in promoting and developing the use of LNG as bunker, as one of the first steps in reducing the emissions of the maritime sector. The strategy of the company that was announced already in 2018 consistently engages NYK to contribute to green activities in a broad range of fields, and especially in the search and development of zero carbon alternative, like we are discussing today, hydrogen and ammonia. Well, IMO has set targets of reduction. As one of our fellow panelists before has expressed, these targets may not be sufficiently aggressive. But what is important to say is that initially, the first targets that we have, companies are ship owner and are working hard to achieve these targets by, first of all, by technological and operational improvement of the existing technologies that are being used, like engine performance efficiency, energy efficiency, optimizing operations, ship design. However, the targets require the adoption of new alternative fuels, the progressive transition towards low carbon fuels, starting with LNG, as it's the case through this decade. But more ambitious targets will require essentially to shift to zero carbon fuel. In this sense, for the next decade, what we expect as ship owning company is the coexistence of several alternative marine fuels together with different technologies that may have different uses in function of the output requirements in terms of engine power, especially. Batteries it may be the best solution for small boats with limited navigation range. For bigger ships engaged in coastal navigation, the fuel cell may be the preferred option in the future, both either hydrogen or ammonia. When it comes to deep sea vessels, we see here that possibly the first opportunity will be given by internal combustion engines running on ammonia. So what is NYK doing in this respect? Which are the initiatives that NYK is taken? We are working together with different partners, including shipyard, classification societies, engine manufacturers, participating in the research and development of several projects involving the use of ammonia as marine fuel. We have the ammonia-fueled tugboat, ammonia-fueled ammonia gas carrier. We have two interesting concepts, ammonia-fueled regasification barge, which could be a suitable option for areas where ammonia is required as a product, but there is a limitation in terms of onshore storage. And we have recently announced the development of ammonia-ready LNG-fueled vessels. A little bit of detail in these initiatives, starting with the ammonia-fueled tugboat. NYK is working together with IHI Power System and Class NK on this project, which could be the first ammonia-fueled tugboat into practical use. These three partners, we have a previous experience with the adoption of LNG for the same application for an LNG fuel tugboat built back in 2015. So most of the knowledge and experiences can be replicated for the ammonia case. The project obviously involves the research and development on all the necessary technical elements for the safe use of ammonia as a fuel, from the bunker manifold, the fuel tank, the fuel supply system, the type and characteristics of the internal combustion engine in this case, all the safety systems, leak and gas detectors, double-walled piping where necessary, etc. And it also involves the development of operational procedures to use ammonia, safety navigation methods, and the guidelines for the safe and reliable bunker handling. This project, the ammonia fueled gas carrier, is a joint project with Nihon Shipyard, Class NK, and recently with Yara. And in this project, basically the ammonia carrier shall use the ammonia stored in the cargo tanks as marine fuel. This is a very usual concept for other type of vessels carrying combustible products as a cargo. With this project, what we aim is on the one hand to contribute to the increasing large-scale transportation and supply of ammonia, and at the same time it will serve as a test bed and benchmark for the use of ammonia as marine fuel. The obvious advantage of this project, this application, is that we do not require to develop the bunkering logistic chain. Finally, we have recently announced the development of a concept, the ammonia-ready LNG fueled vessel. This should allow us, or should facilitate, the transition from the first step that we have taken, which is converting some of our vessels in our fleet into LNG as initial choice, and transition to the second step, which would be the adoption of zero marine carbon fuel, such as ammonia. For this project, we expect results, the first results, by early 2022. Thank you very much for your attention. And back to you, Tore.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. A lot of exciting work going on in NYK, and hoping we can stay in touch and share ideas and results between the ShipFC project and the work that you guys are doing. So thank you very much. Now, we're moving on to the next speaker representing Lloyd's Register. It's Mr. Charles Haskell. He's been with Lloyd's Register for more than 20 years in both practical hands-on roles as project manager and as a surveyor. And he's also been in the commercial part of the organization and in the business development, where he is now business development manager for the maritime and offshore business stream. So with no further introduction, Charles, whenever you are ready, please share your screen and give us your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tore. Let me just share my screen and get that up. Thank you. So just as an introduction, to go a bit further, my name is Charles Haskell. I'm the program manager for the Maritime Decarbonisation Hub. And this is a joint initiative between Lloyd's Register and its owning partner, Lloyd's Register Foundation. And this was really to build on the work which was done by LR in conjunction with UMass, looking at fuel pathways. So we've produced a number of papers, and I think you sort of referenced earlier, of the zero emission vessels transition pathways and at low carbon pathways 2050. over the past few years. And basically, these talked about what was needed to be done. They talked about ammonia, the commercial viability, but really we needed to move it into action and delivery. So the mission statement of the Maritime Decarbonisation Hub is to accelerate the safe and sustainable decarbonisation of the maritime industry. So one of the sectors we'll as well is safety, as well as investment policy, environment, and sustainability. So moving on, just as a quick overview, so today we're discussing safety onshore and aboard. Just a few features of ammonia as a fuel. It is a colorless gas with a strong odor. It's shipped as a liquid at the moment, even at its own vapor pressure, or it can be refrigerated. And although the gas is lighter than air, vapors from a leak initially demonstrate heavier than air behavior. So in terms of where we're looking at gas behavior and leakages within engine rooms, it's not a straightforward analysis, and it really depends on the pressure. Prolonged exposure of containers to fire or heat can cause violent rupturing, and long-term inhalation of low concentrations of the vapors or short-term inhalations of high concentrations can have an adverse health effect. I think it's important on that side, when we look at the current standards, etc., that these are based on chemical plants or food processing plants for the use of ammonia, where a worker is going in working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and is doing rounds, and the levels are based on that. So when we look on board for a ship's engineer on board a vessel, it's a very different working pattern. So we need to consider, rather than just taking applications from other industries, we need to consider where those applications came from in the first place, so that we're relevant and safe. At the moment, ammonia is used quite heavily within the fertilizer industry, and is used as a refrigerant as well, both in chemical and food processing plants. And that's really it. Most of it's covered here. But when we're looking at ammonia as a fuel, safety is the major concern, which we're addressing on several projects, some of which I'll touch on to. Coming back to looking across other industries, currently ammonia isn't used as a fuel in the maritime industry. There's pilot projects starting, but it's important that we try and learn as much as we can from other industries. So some of the work we've been doing is looking at the cases of work in other industries. Now, 80% ammonia is 180 million tons traded per year. 80% of that is for the chemical and fertilizer industry. So that would be a sort of initial point to go and look at. But we also need to look at the applicability and the viability of that industry compared to the maritime industry. So the actual safety record for fertilizer industry is pretty good, as can see on this graph. So these are looking at fatalities and injuries for the past 30 years. However, what stands out here is the food and beverage industry, where the injury rate is quite high and it also has the largest fatalities. And when we look at that industry and we look at who's operating it, it's very much the process plant is not their key concern. They're looking at the food. They're loading and discharging food into warehouses. They are producing food. So the capabilities and competencies within that sector is probably more relevant to the way we operate ships today. So we need to look at that and take learnings from that, and not necessarily just take this look at the chemical process industry, where the workers there are safety process engineers, highly qualified and highly controlled environment. So looking at the rules and the rule requirements, at the moment, if we look at the way gas is put in as a rule, we have high-level goals. So we're looking at safety, and this is equivalent. It's shown as equivalent to traditional fuel. The risk, it's limited to a minimum by design, and then the risk is also mitigated as much as necessary, so as low as reasonably possible. And we have the functional requirements, and then we have the prescriptive regulations. And these really sort of add into it all, and then we've got the appropriate safety, which comes out of that. Now, when we move into ammonia, we need to look at probably more of a quantitative risk approach or a new approach. And we need to look at the high level goals and the functional requirements. So here we have design screening and inherently safe design. And what we require here really need to do is we need to, the identification of the gas over fuel regulations, we need to see which ones remain applicable, which require change or are missing, and then benchmark designs. We need framework and questions to test designs against inherently safe design principles, and we need guidance on what constitute the appropriate level of inherently safe design, because it can be a very long process going down that way. But ideally, at the end, we reduce the severity and the scale of the consequences, we reduce the likelihood of accidents, and this will then lead to, and we need to protect from toxic exposures and fire and explosion. And this isn't just for ammonia we're talking about here, but also following the same approach for hydrogen as a fuel. So where are we at the moment? And this was discussed earlier as well, briefly. Ammonia as a fuel for ships is subject to the IGC code, and ships subject to the IGF code. And it's not part of the work program at the IMO. There's no formal proposal for a work item has been submitted. Arguably, its characteristics mean that no member state would propose work unless they were able to propose requirements which addressed any reservations over the explosive potential and toxicity of the fuel. And that means after extensive trials. But extensive trials would probably need interim guidelines, which is where we are now. So the resolution of this catch-22 will depend on the risk appetite of member states, given the intent to transition shipping away from the reliance on fossil fuels. Now, there's three different ways. The most conservative approach, interim guidelines, and allow ammonia as fuel on ships following the interim guidelines. But the most likely approach is to take interim guidelines associated with the IGC code and the IGF code and allow the use of ammonia as a fuel. And following experience building based on the interim guidelines, incorporate updated provisions into both the IGC and IGF codes. And the least likely approach is to update the IGC and the IGF codes in parallel with first developing interim guidelines. But the main blocker for ammonia may not be on ships, but localized concern over storage of explosive toxic fuels in ports near built-up areas, and this could well inhibit its availability worldwide. So taking that into account, we need to look across the whole supply chain, and it is good, I mean, with the presentation from NYK to see the ammonia bunkering barge there as well, in terms of addressing some of the supplies. But when we look at across the supply chain, we need to take into other parts, the harbour authority, the harbour operating company, the dock operator, the berth or terminal operator, a road tank operator, bunker supplier. The list is relatively endless there. When we look at the UK, for example, you have the control of major accident hazards regulations, so COMA regulations. And for example, when we look, they have upper and higher levels, and therefore it depends what site you are. If we look at ammonia, the lower level for ammonia is 50 tons. And when you're carrying above 200 tons, you are then in an upper tier level. And that just brings additional requirements for safety, which may be too prescriptive in some ports, particularly in built-up areas and ports in cities. Just as an overview of other projects we're working on, there are sort of, I'd say, a flagship project is the Castor initiative. This is about collaboration, working with MISC, Yara, the Flag Administration, a shipyard and an engine supplier. Originally, it was just a traditional shipyard project, but fuel supply was brought in. And that's really sort of to address the supply chain challenges. And we have a number of other projects underway globally as well. And this is just a highlight. But really what we've been doing from the Maritime Decarbonisation Hub is we've been analysing all the projects across the whole supply chain, from resources through to the propulsion of the ship. And we've examined this against technology, investment and community readiness and mapped them out.
I'm
and this
sorry,
is available.
Charles, we need to ask you
Yep.
to
Okay,
kindly
just
conclude. I'm
finishing.
sorry.
Just finishing up. So all of these projects are based, and they're not just the LR projects, but they're based on a dashboard as well. So they're available to see there. And this is about collaboration and sharing. So on that, thank you very much, and apologies for going over time.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's a tight schedule, so thank you for that. Very interesting presentation, and good to see how it's the holistic perspective for both what's going on onshore and also offshore. So that falls in well in line with both the ShipFC project and also the theme for today. So thanks again very much for your presentation. There are questions coming in, so we'll gather up in the end after the panel discussion and answer out as many questions as possible. So those of you who can stay a bit longer, please join us for that part as well. Now, moving into the panel discussion, our first panelist is Mr. Gregor Pavlek, who's a research and innovation and funding manager at Hydrogen Europe. He has over 15 years of professional experience from the consulting business, and he has specialized in projects covering natural gas and renewable energy alternatives. Gregor is responsible for the coordination of the Maritime Working Group, focusing on decarbonization of shipping, as well as finance and funding working group for hydrogen. So, Mr. Pavlek, welcome to this panel discussion. Are you online with us here?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to start my camera, which for some reason doesn't seem to be working. I do apologize. Got some error popped up on my screen that my camera doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, if you
I
have an
apologize
error,
for that. Yeah.
let's just go ahead without the camera. That's fine. Your audio is good, so we can start with the first question. And what do you, with your background, what do you believe is needed to trigger the production of hydrogen-based fuels such as ammonia?
Oh, well, that's a really complex one with a lot of elements to it. There are still many barriers, both on the supply and demand side for ammonia. I guess Mr. Stevenson has already touched upon, I guess, some of the key ones in his presentation at the beginning. If I would pick one, I would probably single out production costs at the moment. I mean, still at the moment, green ammonia is around 3 times more expensive than its fossil fuel comparator. Using even a low sulfur fuels for comparison, it's still around 3 times more expensive. So obviously, if you want ammonia to be a mainstream solution, this needs to be addressed. No matter how many subsidies will be available, it will never be a mass market solution if the costs are that much higher than fossil fuel comparator, let's say. We are quite confident at Hydrogen Europe that this can be done. So seeing the fall of renewable energy prices, given our expectations regarding the fall of electrolyzer capex levels in the coming years, just through mass production, so even not without any technological breakthrough in the meantime. We expect indeed green ammonia and green hydrogen to reach cost parity with fossil fuels. In the maritime sector is a bit challenging, especially a bit more challenging even than the road transport sector, but still by around 2030 we expect the cost parity to be reached. The problem obviously is that we have time to wait for 2030. We think that not, and that we don't have the time. And in the meantime, obviously this trigger, as you have called it, needs to come from legislators. And that's why it's also encouraging to see in the Fit for 55 package that the maritime sector is rather prominent there. We have the inclusion of the maritime sector in the ETS. We have the increase of maritime fuel taxation in the energy taxation directive. All of that already goes some way to close the gap between the green ammonia and other fuels. But still, I think more is needed. I had some higher hopes for the Fuels EU Maritime, for example, proposal, which the targets that are there are not very ambitious, in our opinion. When you look at just 6% greenhouse gases reduction target by 2030, and also with no specific sub-target for RFNBOs. When you also add the fact that onshore power supply has this kind of loophole that whatever the source of electricity, it can be counted as zero emission. And then we fear that this regulation alone will, I mean, the risk is there that it will not be as impactful as it could have been this way. But still, I mean, simply answer the question, I would say that we still need to work a lot on reducing the production costs of ammonia and green hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Gregor, for trying to answer a very complex question in only a few minutes. So thank you very much for that. And in the debate around ammonia, some are arguing that there might be some issues related to the NOx for use of ammonia. What's your perspectives in this debate, and what do you think can be done to eliminate that issue for ammonia?
Yeah, I mean, indeed, the issue is there that we cannot ignore it, and it's not only NOx, it's also N2O, which is quite potent greenhouse gas. I mean, indeed, those emissions can be reduced. I mean, if you would like to use a combustion engine, you can do it by intelligent, let's say, designing the engine in an intelligent way by tweaking, I don't know, maybe the combustor, the inlet temperature of the combustor, the location of the injection port. You can add, for example, a blend of hydrogen into the ammonia, which would also reduce the NOx emissions substantially. So there are quite a lot of tweaks that can be made to the engine design to reduce NOx emissions. It can be you can use an after treatment systems. You can use the exhaust gas recirculation also, sorry, to reduce the NOx emissions. So I think even using a combustion engine is still quite feasible to reduce the emissions to the required MARPOL levels, so that you can meet all the emission control areas requirements and be compatible there. But I would say the obvious solution would be to use the solid oxide fuel cells, probably as is done in this particular project. Where with the right choice of a catalyst, the NOx emissions can practically be eliminated. So that probably would be my answer to the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gregor, for sharing your thoughts on this subject. Next panelist up on stage is Dr. Liu Ming, who's a researcher at the Maritime Energy and Sustainable Development at the Nanyang Technology University in Singapore. Dr. Liu has years of experience working on the various sectors within fundamental R&D, and is also doing some work on ammonia bunkering safety, which is of course highly relevant for us here today. Welcome and thanks for joining us, Dr. Liu. Our first question for you today is, maybe you can tell us a little more on how your studies explore the use of ammonia as an alternative fuel.
All right, thank you for your introduction. Well, I think I would rather take it as a sharing of our overall project creation and how our project works. In fact, last year when we initiated the work on ammonia, it was a real challenge to locate the focused area because the scope seems to be very big. And we spent some time taking a holistic approach of ammonia value chain. We start from production, followed by transportation, storage, distribution, bunkering, and finally, the consumption of ammonia fuel on board. In view that Singapore is and will be one of the largest bunkering ports in the world, we finally narrowed our focus down to ammonia bunkering study. And we believe that now is a critical moment to establish understandings and get ourselves prepared for the upcoming low carbon era. So to our best understanding, so far there is no ammonia bunkering operation. And however, we do see the similarity of ammonia to other alternative fuels, such as LNG and LPG, because both are transferred or bunkered as a boiling liquid. And in addition, fertilizer and chemical industry are also providing vast experiences in ammonia handling, which we can tap on to facilitate the creation of ammonia bunkering process. We are also studying the many possible scenarios of ammonia bunkering, which are results of combinations of bunkering volume, location, temperature, and pressure of ammonia being transferred. And we believe equally important is the impact of accidental release of ammonia because it is highly toxic. And our study in phase 1 relies on simulation software to create toxicity footprint of various release scenarios. And we are also looking at a more detailed near-field simulation in the following phases. And we do hope that the study of ammonia bunkering, toxicity, dispersion will really add important pieces to the entire jigsaw puzzle of this ammonia value chain. Yeah, I hope that I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much for that summary. From your perspective as a researcher, can you tell us or what's your thoughts on how we can learn from the industry leading expertise in the loading, transport and discharging of ammonia?
Okay.
When we look at it from a bunkering perspective.
First of all, I believe one always will have a better vision by standing upon the shoulders of giants. Yeah, and we believe collaboration with industry partners is a key to bring the research outcome to the next level. And during our study, we actually talked to multiple stakeholders, including authorities, marine class safety institution, shipping lines, and tank storage operators. And with their inputs and guidance, we do see the similarities and the differences between ammonia handled as a cargo and a bunker fuel. Based on our understanding, ammonia bunkering shall avoid bunker intake with significant difference in temperature and pressure from those of receiving vessels. But on the other hand, it can be a default operation when ammonia is received as a cargo through cold inbound or warm inbound land-based facilities where refrigeration and heating equipment are part of the process. And our partners with LPG and LNG experiences, they provided invaluable inputs as well. So as a result, at this moment, we can use the similar principle to draw the whole picture of ammonia bunkering, and our public report will be published by the end of this year, which can represent a consolidated view of all project collaborators. And last not least, we believe the safety precautions and the good practices from ammonia industry grant us a very good shortcut where we do not have to re-explore the toxicity characteristics and to reinvent the preventive measures. So with the support of computational power and controlled verification means, we will move the study one step further, I think next year. And again, collaboration is the key. And I believe ammonia bunkering will not be a success without the collective efforts from all stakeholders. Thank you. I think I addressed your
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for addressing that question. And we see similarities to the work we do in ShipFC as well, of course. And we are looking forward to the release of your paper on this when that is ready. So we will follow that closely in the time to come.
Absolutely.
So, thank you again for joining us today. And we're now moving on to our next speaker, and we would like to welcome back Mr. Sabas Martinez from NYK. And there's one question for you today is the fuel flexibility and not just one energy carrier. You showed us one slide comparing the different alternatives for the future, and what's NYK's take on this with the fuel flexibility? I think Shalva also mentioned the possibility for a multi-fuel solid oxide fuel cell. So what's from a ship owner's perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you for the question. I mean, definitely NYK as ship owner is nowadays exploring several fuel alternatives. I mean, we believe that in few years what we will see is the coexistence of several solutions and alternatives, more or less adequate, depending on the business of the ship and the requirements. So it's important that we not only focus on one possibility, but that we are exploring everything. As a matter of example, what NYK is doing nowadays in this sense, well, first of all, we have to mention the effort that NYK is already doing in this transition by currently shifting part of the pure car truck carrier fleet into LNG as the first readily available possibility. But we are also, for example, working on methanol. We have methanol fueled chemical carriers, and we have participated in the world's first barge to ship bunkering of methanol in the port of Rotterdam. We have also conducted trials on the use of biofuel from waste cooking oil that is collected and then refined and applied as marine fuel to the engine for bulk carriers. And we have also research and development projects on hydrogen fuel cell onboard vessels. We have a specific one for a passenger ship, a small passenger ship, in which we are exploring hydrogen high power fuel cell. So yes, I would say that we have to be open to any alternative. However, I have to say, as this is the subject of the forum today, that ammonia indeed presents several features that make it very interesting for a ship owner to consider as a future alternative fuel. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that answer to this question. I think we'll just move on. I have one more question for you, but you have already answered this in your presentation, I believe. So we'll just move on to our next panelist, who's Mr. Joseph Sanz Argent, who's Innovation and Development Project Manager in the Port of Valencia. He's also got a background as a researcher within fuel and engines. So Mr. Argent, if as a leading port in the Mediterranean, you have recently presented a strategic plan that covers the energy transition and decarbonization towards 2030. And you also have experience from establishing LNG bunkering in the port. And how would you draw on these experiences when you're considering ammonia as a fuel for the future?
Hello, Tore, and hi to everybody, and thanks for the invitation. I think we have participated in several projects which aim to promote LNG, and I think you can learn some from the experience, the promotion of LNG in the Mediterranean, and translate that to ammonia in order to identify things that have been studied. In those projects, all of them funded with the Connecting Euro Facility program called like Game for Ship, Game for Moss, Coral, Hive 2. In addition to the investment on assets to create demand and supply, two aspects were analyzed and we considered important. One of them is risk analysis, and that's especially important for ports and from vessels, but that's something that Port Authority have defined how to perform it. The adequate definition of the necessary risk analysis that could be qualitative or quantitative, depending on the situation. For example, it's not the same to do the bunkering for a cargo vessel and to do the bunkering to a cruise ship. It's very important for port authorities because they are the ones that have to analyze the risk and give the permission for the bunkering. And this was an issue for LNG, which is a flammable fuel and cryogenic, but it's not toxic, and it will be the same for ammonia. And harmonization will be also important to collaborate between ports in order to define the requisites that ship owners will be asked when arriving to a port will easy things. Also, we have seen that the availability of checklists such as the one created by IAPH, they are initiatives that also facilitate a lot of the task of both the Port Authority and the ship owners. And with regards with training, in LNG, the training for the crews, it is important to have well-trained personnel in both the vessel and at land for the bunkering. In the case of LNG, the crew was defined, the training requirements was defined by the IGC code, and there is already training programs that fulfill the requirement of that training requirements. In the minimum contents also for the operation at the port will also be important to be defined. And also, as said, and some of the panelists have said before, there are a lot of participants in a bunkering process. You have the port authorities, you have the people at the terminals, you have the fuel supplier, and to develop training programs that cover everything will be very important.
Thank you very much. Maybe you already answered this in a way, but as a port, when you're making sure that, of course, it's important to make sure that the solutions are indeed available for the users. Which are the main barriers? You already mentioned the risk approach and the learnings from LNG. Are there any type of actions that you see needs to be considered, and maybe especially when looking into ammonia?
Yeah. In the case of LNG, for example, the ones previously mentioned, training and risk analysis, are aspects very important to be considered and defined. But in the end, a very important part is the availability of assets. Because if you are bunkering to a vessel, you need the specific assets because the amount of fuel to be bunkered to a vessel is important. So if the amount of fuel, in some cases, if the amount of fuel required is low, you could do that with track to ship operations. And that's feasible in the case of LNG, about 100 cubic meters or so. If you go farther, you may, at the beginning, you may use multi-track to fuel. And in that case, you need an additional asset, which is the control of that operation. If you go farther than that, which is the most usual scenario, you only have two options. Either you go to pipe to ship. In that case, you need a vessel that goes at the same berth over time. So that's applicable for example, ferries, but it will not be applicable, for example, for containers, since they moor in different positions at the berth. So the most flexible option is bunkering barges. And so you need all of that in order for a ship owner to decide to go for a new fuel. And you not only need that in a port, but in a lot of ports, because otherwise it will not be an option selected by the ship owner. So, for example, and that is an issue even in the Spanish case in LNG, which was well positioned. LNG has been used in Spain for a long time to supply the gas grid and also for industrial applications. So we had trucks and considerable fleet of LNG trucks. There were also import plants, and that's something that you will also need in some storage at the ports. That's something that you will also need in the case of ammonia. And even in that case, you also had to adapt those plants to be able to fuel the bunkering barges, which implies a significant investment. And you also need barges at your port, which also needs the commitment of a fuel supplier, the convincement of a fuel supplier that is going to supply fuel. For that to be developed, it has been required the position of the fuel supplier, the commitment of some forerunners. And that's an approach that you will need in the case of ammonia as well. So you need to convince somebody to be the first ones to adopt ammonia as a fuel, and that will start to break the chicken and egg, the famous chicken and egg dilemma. And for that reason, that's something that has been mentioned during this workshop, flexibility will be crucial at the beginning. In the case of LNG, most vessels that have adopted for LNG are opting for dual fuel solutions. So in that case, they are not obliged to use LNG, and they have alternative options in some ports. And finally, additional to that, an aspect that has been lived in the case of LNG has been the doubts in some cases about the environmental benefits of the use of LNG, and I'm talking about the methane slips. So the potential of decarbonization of LNG has been sometimes put in doubt due to the potential of methane slip. So that has meant that some ship owners have decided that wasn't the winner bet. So they have opted for another options. So it is very important for ammonia that from the beginning it is clear that the environmental benefits that the fuel can provide to the ship owners.
Excellent, thank you very much. We have also Øystein Leren from Yara still online with us. We have some questions prepared, but I think maybe for Øystein, we go to some of the questions that we have received, if that's okay for you, Øystein.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's one question. What is the plans for Yara for the generation of ammonia in the hub locations? Will it be produced from fuel from fertilizers byproduct, or will it be from hydrogen produced from green sources?
Yeah, when we look at conversion of existing plants, we are looking at both. Well, first of all, we're looking at converting from gas-based production of hydrogen to water electrolysis powered by renewable power. And we are running there are a couple of projects where we are planning to produce a certain fraction of the hydrogen by green electricity and green hydrogen, and then blend that into so together with the gas-based hydrogen as a low-risk starting point to convert our plants. But in principle, we foresee a situation where we are converting our plants from gas-based to green, meaning production of hydrogen by electrolysis. Our Hegra project in Porsgrunn, for instance, is a project where we are looking at a total conversion of our gas-based hydrogen production to electrolysis production. When it comes to production close to bunkering hubs, I would say that we're not planning necessarily to produce at a bunkering hub. but we see the co-location of an existing asset, production asset, and a typical bunkering hub as the Rotterdam Antwerp area as a good and let's say introductory step in order to expand the infrastructure, because then we can use the existing infrastructure we have at our site with, for instance, storage tanks, etc. Combine that with, for example, bunkering barges in order to get an operation going. So from that perspective, the existing infrastructure in close to a bunkering hub is important. But production of ammonia, if you look at the large scale and future where you need additional production capacity and everything, we believe that there will not be a link necessarily between bunkering hubs and the production facilities. Ammonia can be transported, and that's probably the least of the challenges going forward.
Thank you, Øystein. We have quite a few questions coming in, so definitely there's been a lot of interest in the presentations. We'll round off today with one question for Tjalve, if you are still here, concerning the fuel cells. The questions, there are several questions, and I'll just list them up and you provide answers afterwards, Steve. First one is, what's the largest output of the power of the current solid oxide fuel cell that you have at Prototech? And what is the current start time for the solid oxide fuel cell for ShipFC? What's the expected lifetime for the solid oxide fuel cell for the project? And what's the impact if you have a stop-start situation, and what time is required then to restart the fuel cell? Maybe quite a few questions to remember, but I know you have answers, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I will, quite detailed questions, of course, that would require some more detailed answering than what I will choose to give here and now. I can say at Prototech side, we are currently building 2 different 80 kilowatt modules for extensive testing. We are also doing lab testing on a smaller scales with ammonia, since we have less experience with direct ammonia operation. In addition, I would like to also mention that we have close collaboration with Sunfire as the stack supplier for us, who obviously are a leading supplier of electrolyte supported SOFC stacks. The start time is something that from cold start, it requires quite many hours to go up. So we recommend to have the SOFC system on high temperature and idling, significant downtime. So as I also mentioned, this technology is more relevant for ship types where you have a constant baseload and can supply a baseload from the SOFC systems. The transient operation, when we are at temperature currently, we estimate that we use 20 minutes from 0 to 100%. We can go faster, but it is not the primary focus of the first demonstration. The expected life and the degradation, that is a complex matter. What our strategy is to fulfill the typical major service intervals of vessels of typically 5 years or 7 years, depending on what the vessel it is, and that we do stack replacement. Typically, that is in the end cost efficiency versus capex question, and it's something that we are also studying in the ShipFC project. The footprint for ShipFC, which is containerized units supposed to be installed on deck, is 3 40-foot containers, a bit higher and wider than standard containers, but 40-foot size. It is also not the primary focus of the project to optimize in size, at least very extensively. So, but please contact me directly for more comprehensive answers to these questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chalba. And by that, I think we can thank all of our presenters today, and our panelists for excellent contributions. I have a long list of questions coming in, so the interest in the work that is done and the work that is presented is definitely very high. We'll do our best to provide answers for those of you who have put forward questions, and we would also like to thank the audience for joining us and also staying with us even when we are over time on our schedule. Finally, for more information on the ShipFC project, please visit our website and our LinkedIn page. And a special thank you to the FCH-JU for the support for the ShipFC project and the work that we are doing. So by that, I thank you all for a very interesting morning, and wish you all a good day. Bye.